The Square Ball Podcast.
Hiya, welcome to the show. This is the West Stand, a show we debuted this season. It comes out on a Monday and a Friday. You can find it on YouTube. It's in your podcast app as well. Guests from across the world of Leeds United, such as journalists, ex-footballers. Maybe one day we'll get a current footballer.
Seems unlikely. I don't see. They've not got much to say, have they?
No. Whereas today's guest does. I'm Dan Moylan. With me is Michael Normanson.
You all right?
Yeah, good. NordVPN.com/TSB.
Very good.
Go for the really abridged version.
Completed it. Nice one.
Yeah, great. Do you want to stream stuff from abroad? You want to stream stuff like you're abroad?
If you're abroad and you want to watch back the Leeds Harrogate game on iPlayer, what better way to do it?
And who wouldn't?
I'm going to leave the country right now and watch that game
right
somewhere else.
And if you wanted to book a flight and not be penalised by cookies from a flight provider, airline, that's the word, isn't it?
That's the one.
Yeah. Because
flight provider.
They're a flight provider.
Yeah,
sometimes they do that, though, don't they? They put cookies on your machine and they know if you visited the website and then the prices change.
Yeah.
Naughty. If you want to avoid that, go through a VPN. Which one would you recommend, Michael? Oh, right. Is that? Yeah. NordVPN.com/TSB. You can find details of the deal in the episode description, by the way. It's 4 months free on top of your discounted 2-year plan. If you find it there, 10 devices, you can use it on dead fast. Any other attributes for NordVPN before we move on?
30-day money-back guarantee.
Thank you, Michael Normanson.
You're very welcome.
Our guest now then is Beren Cross. Last time you were here, it was Leeds Live, now of The Athletic. Did you get the limo round? Did they send the car?
Helicopter.
Yeah.
Clicking in his diamond shoes.
Yep. Congratulations on the new gig, though.
Thank you, chaps.
Sincerely. We knew about it, obviously, slightly ahead of time.
Of course.
But we can now go on record and say, well done. You get to hang around in the same whatever special club it is that Phil Hay hangs around in these days.
Since you started appearing on this show, things have gone rather well for you.
Are we
It's uncanny how that is connected.
Have we made him?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
The years of graft have meant nothing.
Right then, it's 10 o'clock on Saturday night. I mean, rock and roll, baby. Rock and roll. But we're recording Monday's West Stand on Saturday, straight after the game, because you've just come out of the press conference with Daniel Farke. And we didn't actually really touch on anything he said in the match ball, so it's worth probably picking up that baton here. How was he and Simon Weaver as well?
Yeah, Farke, I should expect, pretty happy. I mean, a pretty regulation win, as I'm sure you reflected on the match ball. It wasn't a thriller. Very much expected to beat League Two opposition and did that in the narrowest of margins. But he didn't get carried away too much. Clearly, a little bit of attention on Darlow. That was one of the few narratives hanging over from the Hull game, of course, and a couple of full debuts, Schmidt, Giavogi, and of course, Firpo and Grove come back from injury, 2 big boosts. And I think that's kind of where it wasn't really a lot of match chatter, because we've seen it before, haven't we, when Leeds do make hard work of playing against the deep line defence. And even though they got the win in the end, I think none of us are going to get interested in the FA Cup until if they get to maybe the quarters or the semis, I guess.
Yeah. That we said that on the match ball, didn't we? The lack of jeopardy based on the competition. Like, if that had been a hard-fought 1-0 in the Championship, you'd have come away from that perhaps a bit more exhilarated or a lot, heightened emotions, let's say. But as it was just like a bit weird because it's Harrogate up the road and we've never played them before and Harrogate's full of Leeds fans. And
it needed to be probably 4 or 5 today, didn't it, to get anyone properly interested. As it was fine. We didn't lose.
No, we said we didn't really learn all that much from the game. In terms of like structure and approach and all that, we learned more about individuals within the setup, like you say, Darlow, Schmidt, Giavogi.
Yeah, absolutely. There was very little to gain from it structure wise. I mean, it was a very similar formation. I think the fullbacks are even more attacking than usual. But like you say, it's more the individual moments. Like Schmidt, especially, I thought really caught my eye and has done a lot for himself going into those other league games when they're maybe dominating an opposition and it's deep lying and you need that extra sort of X factor from right back. And Darlow, I think, everybody has got their own opinions on the goalkeeping situation and where they stand with Mele and Darlow. And I think whilst Darlow was always going to play today, I think the only thing that he could have done was maybe save 2 penalties or do something daft like that that would have caught the eye. Because I think a clean sheet against League Two is not going to, it doesn't kind of settle that debate, does it?
No.
But he did have stuff to do.
Yeah. I think Harrogate were actually, to their credit, Harrogate were actually quite decent, I thought, at moments and caused a few errors from Leeds players, maybe a little sort of a lapse from Ampadu. I remember when his pass was charged down into March's path and Darlow had to make a save. So yeah, there was a few moments and it dropped a corner, I think, from what I remember, Darlow, and awkward moment with Schmidt in the first half under a high free kick. But good save from that Marsh effort. And later on, I thought the best bit was when he rushed off his line and dealt with that, what could have been quite a dangerous one-on-one. So good reaction times there.
Yeah, I think he did well there.
And call to corner.
Yeah, to ironic cheers. Such is the way with Leeds fans, isn't it?
Yeah, completely.
you know what we're like. But we've been through a lot. That's our excuse. We've been through an awful lot. Yeah, we didn't feel like we learned a great deal, I don't think. But it's interesting to gauge how Farke feels about this, because he's very, very even-tempered anyway. Farke's got a very even temperament, very rarely strays from the middle ground. Any sense of that today whatsoever with his chat about players or performances? Anything at all you learned from the presser maybe?
Yeah, I think one of the slightly more controversial topics, if you can call it that on a day like this, was the youngsters and the lack of them. Because I think a lot of us came in today thinking, right, when Bayo was on the front page of the programme, I mean, I know Farke's not telling the programme makers who's going to be playing, but I suppose you looked at Bayo, Crew, Gelhardt. I mean, some of these players you thought they might get a run out, but when the squad is as fit as it is, Bamford is now the only senior player missing. Of course, we'll talk about Grove and Firpo, but they of course came back into the fold today. There's enough players that have been on the league bench that needed minutes today. And so it was virtually the same 20-man squad, but 8 changes basically brought the bench players in. So I think he said that he doesn't like to give young players a gift. He doesn't gift them debuts. He doesn't want to be a manager that maybe plays a youth player in a game like that and then takes the acclaim of being a manager that trusts his youth players and brings players through, and then you don't see them again for another year. So I think whilst Chambers and Bayo and Crew might have wanted to play, he didn't want to play them, and then you don't see them again for 9 or 10 months, and he's sort of given false hope or whatever. But I think ultimately it's less about them and more about the fact he had senior players who needed minutes today, like Giavogi, like Schmidt, and it was the perfect chance to.
He doesn't really tap into the academy full stop, does he really? The only one that's kind of made that leap is Mateo Joseph, I suppose, who's in first team contention. So I wonder, is that to do with what's at stake in terms of promotion?
I mean, actually, Gray got a few minutes last year.
Yeah, but it tends to be all or nothing is, I suppose, what... Yeah, it's the same thing that Beren's saying. He's not one to sort of dot performances in here and there, is he? To give them 5 to 10 goes. They're either in contention or they're not.
Maybe they're not ready.
Maybe they're not good enough.
It's likely, isn't it, really? Yeah. I mean, if from each group of youth players you get a player from each year, you're doing pretty well, generally speaking, aren't you? So to have a player who has, come out of there is probably par for the course, I suppose.
What did you make of Joseph?
Yeah, he's. I was saying to the guys in the press box earlier that the Joseph we saw in pre-season and the Joseph we see for Spain is very different to the Joseph we see for Leeds, and a lot of that will come down to the opposition that he's facing and the level of it. But I suppose this maybe in the long-term future will be seen as the season where he really kind of learnt the ropes a lot, and may not end the season with a lot of goals, but maybe in time this will be where he really broke through, cut his teeth and learn a lot of those valuable lessons that a very young striker does need to learn over time. So maybe it'll be a season we're thankful for in 2 or 3 years when hopefully we're banging him in the Premier League for Leeds. So certainly hunting for that goal today and kept trying. There's a few efforts from range, but again, it's tough for any striker when you're swamped by 2 centre-backs, especially somebody young like Joseph, who maybe doesn't have the physicality to hold off, grizzled EFL bastards, as you would say. So, I think clearly Pirro, for his faults, is still going to be the first choice striker. But he's got to keep going with Joseph. I don't think you get anything now from dropping him and leaving him out. I think you've got to keep playing him, especially when Bamford, again, is proven so fragile. Yeah,
I mean, there was a point today at which Joseph, and you make a good point, he had 4 players around him and he was trying to find like a yard of space or create a yard for himself. So it must be quite difficult. I just got the sense from watching him today that he just looks quite raw. And I mentioned on the match ball, I feel like he would probably benefit from a full season, maybe out on loan. I'm not talking about now, but down the line. At the moment, we don't have the luxury of being able to do that for him.
Yeah, it's an interesting theory. I suppose if they got promoted, you could maybe see that as being more realistic, because if they got promoted, clearly we all know they're going to need do a lot of business and in theory bring in maybe 1 or 2 strikers, and maybe that then gives the breathing space to send Mateo out somewhere. But of course in the Championship, I think now that they've made their bed, I think he will remain. But if they get promoted, that could be a route they go down, because he is still very, very raw, like you say, and certainly if they got promoted, I don't think any of us would go into next season thinking he needs to start. Yeah,
he looks a little bit like an unbroken horse. That kind of thing, just a little bit wild and kicky.
No, I get that. Yeah, he does seem quite wild. Yeah.
What did you make of the others then? You mentioned focus on Darlow and Schmidt. Schmidt in particular, we were saying we were impressed by him. Thought he looked like he was up to speed. Let's say with maybe actually just to return to something you were saying before. about it just being a little bit scrappy at times. Maybe there's a little bit of rustiness because they weren't all necessarily starters and there were quite a number of changes. Schmidt looked very much in the groove, I thought.
Yeah, I thought Schmidt was probably the high point of the first half. I thought he was constantly providing that X factor, if you like, from right back. I thought his underlapping runs inside were finding passes into the box, and the attacks were then sticking in the box once he'd made that decision. Or if he was going around the outside, he offered an option in behind for Nonso, I remember a few times. And then even in the second half, I thought he was decent enough. But given how ignored he has been through various moments this season where you've thought, right, Farke needs a fullback, why is he ignoring Schmidt? I think clearly we might have come in with a bit of reservations today, but I thought he was decent, and I think I'd be more than happy to see him in those games where they do need a little bit less in defence and more in attack. I think he can do that job.
Yeah, because he's put Ampadu at right back at times. Yeah, and Schmidt looked naturally more at home there, particularly with how advanced our fullbacks get. They're just supplementary wingers almost.
Did we know with the signing of Schmidt how much of it was a Farke decision, how much was a recruitment decision? Because sometimes it's felt like he's almost not wanting to use him to prove a point or something. Yeah,
when he first came in, Schmidt definitely fell into that category of Farke called them interesting young players, and certainly stopped short of showering a few of the new players with praise. He's talked about how Ramazani has come from a relegation in Spain, and how Joe Rothwell was barely getting off the bench for Southampton, and how Schmidt is a complete unknown from the Swiss division. So I think we don't know maybe who was most responsible for it, but clearly it was a development signing and somebody that they maybe needed to fill a stopgap. I think you have to look at the timing of the signing. He came in virtually on deadline day, and he hasn't come in as a starter. So it's not like a high caliber signing like Solomon, where they've had to wait until late on to get a decision from the loaning club. Whereas Schmidt is somebody you would imagine they possibly could have got earlier in the window if he was in demand enough. So I don't know. I don't have any intelligence or sort of information on that, but clearly he's a backup, and he's going to remain a backup for this season.
It felt a little bit like damning him with faint praise when he made those comments.
Because Schmidt he's youngish, but he's not a 19-year-old, is he? He's mid-20s. Yeah. So he's the sort of player who, while he's not been playing at the highest level, he's been playing at a reasonable standard. He's played in Europe, hasn't he? So you'd think he'd be able to come in and make an impact, and it feels like he's almost tried his best not to use him.
I spoke to him, Schmidt, earlier in the season, and he's had quite a story over in Switzerland. He's had highs and lows, and he's had some quite serious injuries over there. He's had to fight back, and St. Gallen aren't a team that are spotted too frequently. And so Farke has frequently mentioned these little niggling injuries that Schmidt's had, and I think maybe getting some consistent high levels out of Schmidt in training has been holding him back. And we know that training is very, very important to Farke and what he sees on the training pitch, which of course none of us see. So I think we have to take Farke at his word with that. And it does sound like, Ampadu spoke post-match today, and he referenced some of the issues that Schmidt has had in getting sort of regular training performances. So the other thing you've got to look at is Bogle and Firpo and Byram have been perfectly serviceable when they've been fit and available. And there is clearly a hierarchy there. I don't think any of us would disagree that Schmidt would be fourth choice out of those four. So that will have been a factor as well.
Can you expand a bit up on what Ampadu said? Because I haven't seen these comments at the time of us recording this.
It wasn't anything too in-depth. We were in a very, very cold, drafty tunnel area when we were speaking to Ampadu, so the questions were quite short and the answers weren't too in-depth. But we just mentioned the fact that Schmidt had caught RI. It was his full debut today, of course. He's waited more than 4 months for that. And Ampadu did literally just say, he has had his difficulties in training. He's had a few niggly injuries, and it hasn't always been easy for him. But we've got faith in him. We know he's a very useful option, and it shows our squad depth today, basically, with the changes they made.
You mentioned Solomon before. You spoke to him actually. You did an interview recently with him.
Yeah, this week.
First biggie for the Athletic, and I thought he looked, and he's looking like he's in the ascendancy at the minute. His quality's just starting to shine through as he finds rhythm.
Yeah, you said it before, Michael. I think he's definitely finding that groove now. I think when he first arrived, we thought he might be the talisman if it wasn't going to be Nonso, given that the background Solomon has had both with Shakhtar Donetsk and with Spurs and with Fulham. Of course, we remember the goal at Fulham that Solomon scored against Leeds. And he had those first couple of cameos or starts where he did okay, but then the error against Burnley, and then, of course, he gets injured, and that really sets him back for quite a long time. And Ramazani then finds his groove, and it's only when Ramazani then gets injured that Solomon gets back in. And I think when I spoke to him in the week, I asked him, do you think that because none of us are footballers, we underestimate how hard it is to come back from 2 meniscus injuries like that? He's been out he barely played any football last season at all, and he's not a robot. You can't come in and just immediately find that level again. And it is about playing regularly and finding that rhythm. It does take time, especially when you're a player like a winger, and you need to have those rapid movements, that instinct, that first touch, that killer final ball. And it, like you say, it does feel like he's finding that groove now. I think that's why I spoke to him this week, in that he has now emerged as it's him and James. They are the first choice wingers right now, and he's playing more minutes than not. Again, nearly got 90 again today. Provided the assist for Ramazani, and I think it all being well, if he can avoid injuries, I think he's going to be a really important asset going through especially as the temperatures get warmer and we go into that running period where we need quality players to make big differences.
More so than anyone else in the team at the moment. It feels like he's the one who's able to just create a bit of space for himself, whether it's through a touch inside, where because he can go either way as well. But he seems comfortable with using his left or his right, and he just makes him very difficult to defend against. Like the cross today that he puts in, he seems marked, and then a second later he's got 2 yards of space, and he's got the room to put in a perfect cross, and it's inch perfect, and it's it's unmissable by the time it reaches Ramazani. On
top of that, it is worth adding that he was marked by 2 players for large spells of that, and it was only when he managed to sort of create that space for himself and get free of the double marking. As the game probably got a little bit more stretched in that second half, I thought, when I think Harrogate came out in the second half and had a little bit of a sniff of it, which opened it up a little bit and created some space for him.
The goal was a great example, wasn't it? Because he waited patiently and he wanted to duck inside as he normally was onto his right foot and maybe take a shot on it, and he just waited.
In fact, my dad did say, he went, go inside.
Yeah. He was waiting for that moment, and he showed patience and he didn't rush it. He didn't try to go inside anyway and then risk getting tackled. He waited and waited. The defender committed slightly. Then he goes to the left. And as you say, he goes off his left foot this time, gets the cross in. And Ramazani, of all people, is there from 5 yards, unmarked.
Yeah, it was about as routine a finish there as you're going to get. Nonto, did you see him predominantly in the 10 against Harrogate?
Yeah, I think.
And what did you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, Farke said today it was an opportunity today to see players in different positions as well, and he wanted to see what Solomon was like in the 10. And like you, I thought Nonto was. I mean, Ramazani was. I thought all three of them actually. Ramazani was a bit in there as well. Nonto didn't catch my eye as much today, to be honest. I think it was Solomon and Ramazani, of course, got the goal, and Ramazani had a couple of the main shots in the first half. So Nonto went a bit under the radar for me today, to be honest. But I think people have got their own opinions on Aronson. I've got no objection to Farke changing Aronson in the next game or the game after that. I think Aronson is doing what he can. He's scoring some decent goals. But I'd be more than happy to try any of those 3 that started today as a 10, just to see what it's like.
My point on the match ball was, though, that I don't think any of the front 4, barring Solomon, made a great case for starting the next match, though.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
In terms of the market, though, what would you do with the market? Because that's obviously a hot topic at the minute, particularly off the back of Daniel Farke's remarks on Thursday. You were there in the press conference where he was saying, we won't fall asleep. We will keep our eyes open to any opportunities. There was a little hint, really, between the lines that maybe 1 or 2 positions is something they'd like to do. What did you take from it?
Definitely, I think a 10 is just obvious. I think we might have even had the discussion on this podcast. I know you guys have it weekly on your shows, but I think clearly the hangover from the Buendia / Hamer / McAtee, who of course got a hat-trick today, which will do his prospects no harm in January. Clearly, he or they or some of them at the top of the club wanted a 10. Should have got one done. I think most of us would agree in the circumstances, and that remains the one question mark coming into this window. I take Farke's point. The squad is in a really, really good place at the moment. Like I said earlier, Bamford is the only injury at the moment, and I think few people might have already discounted Bamford as an option because of the consistent injuries, and he does seem to be third choice striker. So you look at that squad and every position is well covered. I mean, they're overrun with midfielders now. I mean, Guerrero coming back is astonishing, the fact he's back this quickly.
How quick is that?
Which we can talk about. I mean, the only time frame we were given was the Bulgaria boss talked about it, and he said it would be a 5-month recovery, which was in October. So we were thinking it's going to be March. I mean, Farke did say it was worse than Ampadu's, but for him to be back now in mid-January and playing minutes is incredible. So that's just one example of how fit the squad is at the moment. Of course, Ferper comes back today as well. So I think in terms of the market, definitely a 10. And I'm sure if something materialises, and it rarely does in January, but if it does, I'm sure they will look to go and do it. I mean, I think Buendia would be absolutely perfect and would be some signing, but I still am struggling to join the dots on that one, given the noises that came from Villa over the summer.
And it was as much him, I think, as well.
Yeah.
Turning it down, perhaps.
Yeah.
But then
that's
again,
what Kinnear said to you guys, wasn't it?
Yeah, but then again, he's got 20 minutes off the bench, was it, for Villa in their cup game. So, how far does this go for him in the second half of the season? Would he want to be playing regularly? And if so, where would they be prepared to let him go? And where would he want to go?
I think, as we've seen since relegation, is a lot of it does depend on which players the bottom sort of 5 or 6 clubs in the Prem want. Because, as Angus has said publicly a few times, people just really don't want to play in the Championship. And regardless of whether you're in a relegation battle or not, the Prem has got that appeal and has got eyes on it. And agents will look at it and say, well, I'd rather you go and play for a struggling Prem side, because if you blag 2 or 3 goals in a run-in for a poor team in the summer, you're going to have X number more clubs that will have seen that and will want to take you on in the summer. So I think Leeds will be sort of behind in the pecking order to a lot of those clubs at the bottom end of the Prem. But yeah, I think we have to take Farke at his word and say they won't fall asleep. I know probably some fans are getting fed up with that phrase, but I just think it's going to take that quality for them to move. I mean, he gave the extreme examples of Bellingham and Van Dijk, didn't he? Just to prove that if somebody good enough does come up, we will go for them. It's not a blanket no to any player that comes up, but they have to be the right kind of player.
Sometimes, though, there can be other factors, like you've seen Lafieu's gone to Sunderland because the pre-existing relationship with Labris, who's their coach. So I suppose Farke is trying to tap into a similar sort of dynamic where Buendia is concerned, because he was his boy at Norwich, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, if I was Buendia and I was open, I wanted to play for a good team that was looking for wins rather than a team that's fighting its relegation. Surely Farke he's very settled in England now, Buendia, and he's not the sort of guy that's looking to go back to Argentina or anything. So I think if you could handpick a manager, Farke clearly got the best out of him in his career. He hasn't hit those heights with Villa yet. I know injuries haven't helped him, but Farke is clearly his man.
Mm. Yeah, and you can come in and you can play. How many games have we got left? Is it 20 now?
Something like that.
And the playoffs.
Yeah.
Michael,
stop it. No need.
No need. There's no.
Today's it's a glorious day. It's 1 foot towards Wembley.
How many more cup games? How many more rounds of the cup?
Mind you, I was going to say the Championship is 20 games to Wembley, isn't it?
But yeah, I mean the FA Cup's typically two games for us, isn't it? At the most. So,
based on Joseph's performance today and the fact he doesn't quite look ready, is that an area you'd look to add to? And I feel, I don't know about you, but I feel like he said a couple of positions. It feels like he might want somebody defensively to go in behind Rodon, a right-footed centre-back. And then your other option is some form of attacker. There's no cause for a winger, maybe. So
No.
you're kind of left with the idea of a 9 or a 10, which makes me believe they wouldn't do both.
I would be staggered if they did a 9 and a 10, given we are repeatedly being told they are expecting a quiet window. Not that they want a quiet window, but they're expecting a quiet window because, as I've said, the players of the calibre that would turn their heads just won't be available because it's the nature of January. So I'd be staggered if they did both. I would prefer a 10 to a 9, but if they were to go and get a good 9, I mean, who doesn't want a good 9 in this window? That's the unfortunate thing, is you are going to be scrapped. Any good 9s that are available are going to be scrapped for. The price is going to get driven up. And I'm not Pirro's biggest fan, but he's still sticking the ball in the net when he does play. And I just, I mean, I'm not privy to the financial situation. Clearly, Farke keeps talking about how they've raised more money than any other club in Western Europe. So clearly that is on his mind. You know, that is definitely something that he is using as a stick almost to
Bit of leverage, maybe
to those above, but also those outside, to say, look, if I get this done, I've done it with raising the most money in Western Europe and bringing through the likes of Ramazani, Rothwell, Schmidt, Tanaka, people who none of you heard of, and I've turned them into a title winning machine. So it'll be on his mind. Yeah, I think whilst Joseph and Pirro are there as options, I can't see them going in for a 9.
You can't. You see, I think for me that is probably slightly more pressing than the 10, or offers you that extra degree of insurance. It was when we spoke to Bryn Law, actually, wasn't it, last week? And my mindset with this sort of thing is I just want us to do more than enough to do it. And I know that there are financial parameters. There's a squad harmony parameter there that he's going to have to factor in. There's lots of different things. But just remove any doubt. Give yourself, even if somebody comes in and scores 5 to 10 goals between now and the end of the season, and even if you have paid 10 to 50, whatever it might be, I don't know, it just pays for itself over and over again. Just remove that element of doubt is how I feel about it. I might be wrong. We might actually have enough without doing that. But I'd like us to just go that extra yard.
It was obviously at the opposite end of the season, but you look at Eddie Nketiah, the part of the season we had him, didn't actually start many games, but did score quite a few crucial goals, like won us points in that early part of the season. And if you can get someone to do that in the end of the season, even if it gives you 3 points, it can be enough to make the difference.
As we saw with the final table last year.
It's a great example. Nketiah is a great example. I mean, I've had that debate with myself this week about the goalkeepers. I know it's to say the debate is the same, but it's just a different position in that I wonder if the 49ers are looking at it thinking, right, we have to get promoted this season. We do not want the hard reset, the painful rigmarole of a summer going into a third championship season. This is what none of us sign up for. None of the investors sign up for this. Patience will run out for some people, I would thought. And from afar, they'll be looking at it at Melee thinking, right, we are top of the table. We've had a really, really good season. 90% of that team is doing really, really well, and we're probably going to tick over really well. We've got enough in reserve. The injuries aren't an issue at all at the moment. The squad's in a really, really good place. But what are the things that, again, that could possibly derail us? And, you know, without completely ruining Melié's career, but I mean, they might look at last Saturday and think, right, that is an element of the team. Daniel, can we do something about the goalkeeper? Is that an area where we can help you? Because we really want to get over the line in May. And everybody would have seen it by now, but Farke made his points very, very clear on Thursday about Meslier. So we may not want to get into that again, but I take your point in that I wonder if the ownership are looking at what you've said, a 9, a 10 or a goalkeeper, and say, look, we can maybe get the money if you really want the right player. I mean, it might not be the perfect player, but if it would just make us feel a bit better going into the running, then we just have that extra 5%. But the squad is already, I mean, the 20-man squad they put in most weeks when it's fit is really strong. So if you were to do that, you are then leaving out, you know, in some cases maybe a full international out of the 20-man squad. So again, he's looking at squad harmony, and he's Farke, and he's done this, you know, better than any of us. We were talking about, have you learned anything from the cup game? Do you think we learned anything? Like I say, without labouring the point, I think I would trust Schmidt now. If Schmidt was needed, I wouldn't have any concerns about that. But beyond that, not especially. I think very, very hard to learn too much about Darlow today. Clearly, Meslier is going to play next Sunday, and I think it's just a case of hopefully there's no more errors. But if there are, how many will it take before Farke acts? But apart from that, Guiavogi, I think he is probably one of my favourite players in the squad. Having spoken to him, he is a phenomenal human being, and I was willing him to do well today. But unfortunately, he did look like a player who hadn't played with football, and you could see why he was put at centre back, where he's slightly maybe less exposed. And even then, he had a right battle with their striker. So I think we probably learnt that he will remain very much a player in the background for the dressing room. But beyond that, Gurev's powers of recovery, learned about that. Yeah, quick.
We have seen changes in the medical department, and it's unusual actually. Maybe this is pure Leeds dread coming in, but typically when we're told a player will be 6 weeks and doesn't need an operation, you go, well, that's 8 weeks and an operation, then another 2 months after that. Whereas actually Ampadu, Gruev, Firpo, everyone's on schedule or ahead, aren't they?
Really quick. I asked that we spoke to Ampadu at the hospital visit before Christmas, and I said, you know, what's the secret? You know, how did you get ahead of it? And he quite sort of teasingly said, "Oh, that we'll keep that in house." But I think ultimately it's just every player is different. The injury, every player's body reacts to an injury in a different way. But like you say, mate, I mean, the injury record speaks for itself. I mean, if there is only Bamford out at the moment, then clearly, whatever the reasons are, they're doing a good job behind the scenes.
Poor Pat.
Poor Pat. With one eye to Sheffield Wednesday, then, what do you think this forthcoming week will bring us at Leeds? Is it just a case of nursing people through to that next game? Yeah, I would imagine a lot of debate, certainly externally, about Meslier, and I'm sure they're pretty good at shutting out the noise up there. I mean, Farke spoke about Meslier on Thursday and said he's very self-critical. They've had a very sort of open conversation about it, and certainly Farke's done all he can publicly to back him and give Meslier that confidence if he can. Going to do a piece on Meslier next week, and spoke to Marcos Abad, his former goalkeeping coach, and Andy Lonergan, who you'll remember was the goalkeeper that was injured, which allowed Paul Rahubka to have his infamous evening. So I spoke to both of them, and they've given me some really interesting insights into Meslier, and they both, I mean, Abad clearly has got a relationship with Meslier and is very, very close to him, and was never going to sort of slag him off to me, but he backed him and said, that's exactly what Ilan would have needed to hear from Daniel. And Lonergan, who has got no allegiances to Meslier, said he thinks he's a phenomenal goalkeeper, and has got no problems at all with the way Farke handled it, and he thinks that Meslier will take a boost from it. Interesting. It'll be interesting to see how this one unfolds. What about you?
I'm just remembering the cover we had of the magazine, which was Lonergan and Wiedwald on the cover, and it was
Battle about Felix as well. Yeah,
Battle of the Flapperweights was right. Like a boxing style. So I think when Wiedwald had been terrible, then Lonergan came in and also made quite a big mistake.
Right.
And then Bailey saved the day.
Yeah, and then
the cycle all went again.
Christ.
Yeah. Maybe one day will be normal.
Maybe. Nigel Martin was good.
I was going to say, have you had a good goalkeeper since Nigel Martin? Paul Robinson passed the test for you?
Yeah, a number have had spelt like Rob Green was fairly trustworthy. I always felt like.
Yeah,
solid Champo goalkeeper.
there've been a few that were fine.
Silvestri, before my time, but how did you all feel about Silvestri?
I mean, he did well to recover from that horrific lipstick injury on his back. I mean, you suffered with a bad back. I suppose your heart went out.
Nothing as bad as that.
Yeah. Kept him out of that Charlton game.
Yeah. He was a good shot stopper, but I think he's matured to be a decent.
Yeah, he has actually.
A decent goalkeeper. I think. Obviously, I'm not watching him, but
just heard the internet.
But he got in an Italy squad once, didn't he? I believe.
Yeah.
But I suppose we just had quite a few. Like Neil Sullivan was pretty good for a bit. Kasper Anken was all right. Kasper Schmeichel was all right. So we've had some sort of functional Champo keepers.
I suppose you tend to frame your thinking around these about the errors and the bad bits, don't you? Because the scale of an error with a goalkeeper is so pronounced. Like you saw with Melier, it swung the game. It cost us a goal, which ultimately swung that game.
Kiko against Derby.
Yeah.
Before his latter
Kiko against
sins.
Charlton. But yeah, so I suppose those errors are magnified, and you tend, reputations can be tarnished based on single games almost. Whereas, a striker can miss dozens of chances. We've seen what's happened with Bamford, that we go through the Bamford cycle quite often, don't we? Where he will have a little bit of a streak in the side, then get injured, but then come back and come off the bench a couple of times, and suddenly he's the answer to the problems. Then he comes back in again, and people get fed up of him because he misses chances. And
it's those flashpoints in either box. The matches that either win or lose your games, and those players, and that's entirely how you sort of frame your opinion around them.
But the tolerance for the attacking players, because their mistakes don't have the same weight on them as goalkeepers, are handled differently, and you allow yourself to think that. Whereas people have been writing off Melier. I personally do fear for Melier in the long term. Fear for Leeds. With Melier, I feel like he's probably, confidence-wise, is he ever going to be confident in a Leeds shirt? Again, I have my doubts, but not to any great level anyway. I guess time will tell. And I don't know much about football. I'm not sadly, not a professional footballer. Because if I was, I wouldn't be here with you boys. Mind you, I won't be at mid-40s either.
No, it seems so.
No, I know goalkeepers can go a long time, but that's too long. Beren, cheers. Just waffling shite about goalkeeping now, so we'll play sign up. It's late on Saturday night.
Yeah, I would personally stick with Darlow, but everyone else seems to think he's going back to Melier. So
I think I'd be staggered if he went to Darlow now, given what he said on Thursday.
And this has buffered it a bit, hasn't it? This game will buffer it. There's another 7-8 days now until the next game. There'll just be enough time has passed for people to forget up to a point, I think.
The Cup game was perfectly timed to just get Melier out of the firing line for a week and give him effectively 2 weeks to reset. I think it will be the hill that Farke dies on. I mean, he's stuck to his guns. You can't argue he's not nailed his colours to the mast. He's been very, very clear with all parties concerned. And if it does blow up in their faces, then we know where to point the finger.
And what guns? Oh, right. We'll wrap it up there. We'll see you soon, Beren. Cheers. See you later,
guys.
The Square Ball Podcast.